Awesome. So welcome everyone to our second episode of the Ask GBS series. My name is Renita Pliel. I'm the outreach exec for AdvoSci Health, and I'm here with my fellow team members, Omar, who is the president of AdvoSci Health, and Zain, our events executive. And today we will be chatting with our special guest, Holly, who is a GBS survivor, a certified personal trainer, and a well-known inspirational speaker for the GBS community. Before we get started on some of our questions, Holly, would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself as well as your experience with GBS?
Absolutely. So it is a long story, so I'll try to keep it brief, but it all started over 11 years ago. So 11 years ago, I would have been in my early 20s, and I was completely healthy, living life. And I had actually just given birth to my daughter. I was a new mom, and I was 26, and I was just very excited about life. And I felt like I had my whole life ahead of me. And when you're healthy, you don't realize like how lucky you are to have your health. And so suddenly one night, I was at home with my daughter. She was only just over 3 weeks old. And we were hanging out at home, and life was great. And I was just getting so excited for our future together. And all of a sudden I got this weird tingle in my fingertip. And at first I didn't really pay attention to it because I thought it was just something like maybe I'd burnt myself or something. But then later on that night, I started to have weakness in my legs. And then I had this weird pain in my neck. And it was all coming on very, very suddenly and quite severe. The pain was very severe. And so I thought maybe that I had a pinched nerve. So I went to a Medi-Center and talked to a doctor, and he actually agreed and said, yeah, it probably is just a pinched nerve. And that's what I've learned with my experience over the years now with Barré Syndrome, is that because it's so rare that doctors just don't see it very often, so they aren't able to recognize the symptoms. So going back, I ended up going back home because I thought it was just a pinched nerve, but the pain and the weakness just continued to get worse, and like out by the hour. So within about 3 hours of seeing that doctor, I was having trouble walking. And my daughter, she was breastfeeding, and so I was needing to get up and take care of her and everything. And one of those times I stood and I actually fell, and I could barely even get up anymore. And so it was at that point that I knew it was something more than just a pinched nerve. And I brought myself to the ER. And there I was lucky that I did see a doctor that was like, hey, you're progressing very quickly. And I think I might know what this is. So I'm going to refer you to a neurologist who's going to come take a look at you. And from there, I just continued to get worse. So they did a spinal tap on me, and that's where they were able to confirm that it was Guillain-Barré syndrome. The protein levels in my spinal fluid were elevated. And the prolaps just basically spread through my body. So it spread very, very quickly. And I mean, 1 minute I was completely healthy, and then less than 72 hours I was on a ventilator in ICU. So it did spread that quickly all the way up to my diaphragm. So I wasn't able to breathe on my own. I couldn't move my body at all. I was completely paralyzed, breathing on a ventilator in ICU. And the doctors told us that one day I would get better. I just had to kind of get through the acute phase of GBS. But it was very hard for me to believe because I was incapacitated, couldn't move, couldn't do anything. I was, like I said, a new mom, so I was trying to take care of my baby, but I couldn't. I had to just kind of lay there and do nothing, and it was very devastating. And I stayed like that for a very long time. So I was in ICU for over 2.5 months, and for a very in that state, I went through a lot of depression and a lot of anger and a lot of frustration and worry about my future, and if I would ever survive or if I would ever get out of there. But I was so fortunate to have a wonderful team of doctors and a wonderful support system. And they got me in touch with other GBS survivors. They came into the hospital to show me that they were fully recovered and they were doing well, and that there was life after GBS. And that kind of gave me that hope, as well as my daughter. She was a big inspiration for me to get better and get back to her. And so just slowly over time, things started to improve. The paralysis faded first in my fingers and then moved down to my hands. And then it kind of faded within my feet. And slowly I was able to kind of regain movement. And then breathing on my own again with off the ventilator, that was a whole other journey. And it was learning to breathe without that ventilator and practicing weaning off of that for many, many weeks. But eventually, after, like I said, about almost 3 months, I was able to breathe on my own, got the ventilator out, and I was able to breathe on my own, and I moved to basically a rehab hospital. And from there is where I started my journey to rehabilitation. So I learned how to use all of my body parts again. Learned how to hold cutlery and feed myself and drink from a cup. And eventually I got strong enough where I was able to stand, and I started standing for like 30 seconds at a time. And then I would stand for a minute at a time. And it was such a slow process. And it, like, my journey, it really hasn't been like this before and after. It's been like these tiny little accomplishments along the way. But eventually I was able to walk on my own again and get back to my baby. So that's kind of the gist of my story.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the fact that even though for you it did progress quite quickly in the beginning, it's a good thing that, the neurologist was able to detect it and, at least know what it is so that we can get ourselves on the right track so that we're moving, in the right direction towards recovery. So yeah, and I mean, to see you come out of that and you're just being able to take care of your children as well as yourself, and how well you're carrying yourself now, it's really inspirational, and something that, like, I found it, like, I was like, I really look up to you on your resilience, on how you carried yourself through that. It's really amazing.
Thank you.
um
I think a lot of people, they don't realize how strong you are until you're put in those situations. Because looking back, like, I would have never considered myself the type of person that would be able to overcome something like that. It just seems so foreign to me. It just felt like I wasn't strong enough to get through that. And there was many times, like, in my journey, that I was like, I can't do this anymore, and I can't keep doing this. I can't keep fighting. But because of my support system and everybody else, of just being able to get me through and being my strength when I didn't really have a lot. And then now looking back, it's like, yeah, I am strong enough. I think we all are a lot stronger than we realize until we're put in those situations.
yeah, no, for sure, that's I completely agree with that. Yeah. um Omar or Zane, do you guys have any questions that you would like to pose?
Yeah, I just wanted to voice Renita's comments. Yeah, I definitely see you as an inspiration as well. I also watched, I believe you had like a YouTube video. There was a YouTube video
Yes.
of your whole like journey as well. So I watched all of that before as well. And it was really, really like motivating as well. And like seeing your progress, like from where you were in the beginning to where you were at the end. And like you could tell from the video, like how it's filmed as well, like, what are your motivating factors, your support system. It's all in like imagery is like a huge thing, like it like builds up the narrative and everything. So I really got to see that, and it was really, really amazing. Like everything you said about like mindset and like, how you're stronger than you actually think you are. I definitely think that that applies to a lot of things too, but for sure, like, uh, your experience was like, very like inspirational. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And when, like I said, like, I had somebody else that had GBS come to visit me at the hospital. He was the first person that I'd ever met with GBS before. And so when I was first diagnosed, I had never heard of Barré Syndrome before. I couldn't even pronounce it. And I was like, what is this? And the doctors were like, it's very, very rare. And like, some nurses were telling me that they had never seen a case before. Some doctors even were saying like, I don't have much experience with it. And so for me, it felt very isolating, and it felt like I was the only person in the world with GBS. That's what it felt like to me. I mean, I was on a lot of medication, so I was kind of out of it, but I felt like I was one of the only person in the world that had it. And so when I met this other person, and then when I started to recover and I met other people that had GBS, I realized like there's all this whole community of people out there that have had this disease. And it really inspired me to show other people, like, I didn't want anyone to be in ICU or not even that severe, but maybe a milder case. I didn't want anyone being stuck in a hospital bed thinking that they were the only person in the world with this disease, or thinking that they were never going to recover, believing that there was no hope for them. And so that's why I've really done what I have, with advocating and sharing my story, just so that people know that there is hope and there is life after GBS. And sometimes you won't believe it until you kind of meet somebody else that has gone through it too.
I think this would be a great time to ask one of the questions I was planning on asking in the interview itself. But
Sure.
what do you think is like, or what advice would you give to somebody who recently got diagnosed with GBS, now having been through it yourself, and you had a strong support group, as you're saying? So is there
Yeah,
anything from that, or that you personally felt like could help somebody who just recently got
I would
diagnosed?
say like the number one thing is just to never give up. Knowing that it is such a slow journey, and when you're going through it, it feels even slower. And so you think that like you're not getting better, but you have to keep trying, and you have to keep working towards that recovery. Recovery is not easy. It is like the hardest thing to have to push yourself. I mean, exercise in itself is a challenge for most people, and this is times 100, right? And so you're having to do that hard work to rehabilitate the muscles. So I want to say to people, like, just never give up, keep working towards it. Acknowledge when you are making progress, even if it feels like such a tiny thing. Like for us, the first time that I moved my finger was such a big deal, and we had to kind of just hold on to that hope that that was a sign that I was getting better. And so then holding on to the next thing was, okay, now I can wave. And so they seem like such small tasks, but just acknowledging that you are making progress. And then another thing I would say is that find that community. So know that you are not alone. And sadly, there's millions and millions of people that have had GBS in the world. They are out there, and there are support groups online. There are GBS foundations. I'm part of the one here in Canada. And there are people out there that are wanting to help you. And so don't go through it alone. People can answer your questions and provide support, and you don't have to go through this disease alone, thinking that you're never going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely feel that too. Like when we had the privilege of talking to other GBS survivors as well, and they also voiced this, like, importance of community and like being able to network yourself with others, and also having those like channels as well, because it's like there's also family, and there's also like your hospital like support system, but another thing is like seeing another person in your shoes as well, or have been in your shoes, and then that just gives you that like sense of hope. And then they look forward to that as well. They look forward to like being in that stage as well. So yeah, for sure. And also another thing we wanted to like address is like, have you heard of any misconceptions or myths behind GBS that you'd like to like debunk right now?
Absolutely. So it's the one that I hear most often is doctors will say, like, wherever you're kind of at year 2 is where your recovery will kind of end. And the misconception there is that majority of people will do the most amount of recovery in the first 2 years. That is definitely true. But it doesn't mean that you can't continue to recover after that. And so I've met some people over the years that have said, like, well, it's been 2 years now and I still haven't recovered. And they just kind of feel like giving up, because their doctor is like, well, it's been 2 years, you're not really making any more progress. So, and they kind of lose hope. And so what I would want people to know is that you can still make progress years and years later. I have met many, many people over the years. Now that I'm working with the GBS Foundation, I've talked to hundreds and thousands of people around the world. And I still to this day meet people that will say, yeah, I'm suddenly able to stand now when I wasn't able to before. And this is like happening 5 years later or 7 years later. And I once met a woman that she hadn't completely recovered. And she kind of had given up and stuff. And then at 7 years later, she decided, you know what, screw this. I'm going to really put some work in and start going to the gym and starting to do some work. And she was able to get into running. And so it's just stories like that that I want to remind people that, like, just because it's been 2 years doesn't mean that you can't make more progress down the road.
Out of curiosity, then, even now, like 11 years later, do you still at times feel any symptoms or any like effects from GBS?
I do, yeah. GBS is, yeah, it's never completely gone away. I have a lot of tingling sensation in my feet from nerve damage. I do get nerve pain from time to time, and nerve pain ranges from like tingling and aching, usually in my legs and in my arms. And I also get fatigue, so I'm not quite able to keep up as much as like if I was completely healthy. So I can get very drained. Like if I do too much or I push myself too hard, then I'll just crash and I'll like need to lay down, or I'll need to sit down, or I'll need extra sleep for a couple of days. But I've been very, very fortunate in that I've figured out over the last 10 years after recovering what works and what doesn't for me, and what aggravates that. And so for me, like getting enough sleep, exercise has actually been wonderful for me. And so if I exercise regularly, then I'm able to kind of combat that pain and all that. And just knowing kind of when to push myself, but also knowing when to take breaks. So I'm very fortunate that the majority of residuals that I have are very, very manageable and don't really affect me anymore.
That's good. No, like, especially like, you know, when we have a problem, it's best to, I mean, sometimes it's difficult to understand, like, you know, what will work and what may not work, and what are the things that will help us to get out of it. So it's especially when it comes to something like GBS, you know, after it, you know, taking the time to understand that. But, you know, it's very good to hear that, you know, you have certain things that, you know, for sure, like, for example, exercise, since it's really working well for you, knowing the things that will help you to get out of these flare-ups and the things that you can do to prevent these. So it's really good that you have that.
Yeah, and everybody is so different too, I find, with meeting GBS survivors. And some people will have very similar residuals to me. Some will have them more severe, some won't have any. It ranges from person to person. So like I said, that's why I think it's great to meet other people so that you can kind of connect with them, learn about what they're going through, learn about what things work for them, learn what triggers them so that you can try to avoid it as well.
How frequent is the exercising usually? Is it like 3 to 4 times a week?
For me, yeah, I exercise usually about 3 to 5 days a week.
Okay.
Is what I'm doing. For anybody else, like for me, I have just really found that it helps me. It gives me a lot of energy when I'm exercising regularly. But for the average person that maybe isn't so keen on getting into exercise or is new to it, then even like 2 to 3 days, just something can really help and make a difference.
You can still do like regular like exercises like that you love and whatnot.
Absolutely. And what I've learned is that, like I said, with not realizing how strong you are until you actually go through it, is many times where when I first got into exercise, it was shortly after I was recovering, and I was doing physiotherapy, and then I had to go back for more physiotherapy before I went back to work. And the physiotherapy setting was in a gym, and basically a regular gym. And that's kind of where I fell in love with fitness, because they were showing me things and I was like, I can't really do that. And they were like, well, we're going to try and we're going to work towards it. And every week that I went, I started to get a little bit stronger and a little bit faster and better at everything. And then by the end, it was like a 12-week program. And by the end, I was doing things that I thought no way that I was even going to be able to do. And so I really encourage people to not like discount exercise and say like, well, I can't do that kind of stuff. Sometimes you just have to try. You have to be consistent. You have to just keep working at it. And it's amazing how much our body can react to exercise in a positive way that we don't even realize. And so again, you don't even realize that you have those capabilities, but you have to try. And I've met so many people over the years that have said, like, I got into it, I did these things, I didn't even know I'd be able to. I'm so glad that I did.
Yeah, for sure. No, I just like to add on to that, like just like how you mentioned, like, to to have that mindset to just try it out, even if you may feel like, oh, I don't know if it will work out, but that overall, that mindset to just, okay, I'm going to give this a shot and then see how it goes. Because I feel like, for any illness, I feel like if we have the right mindset, our body will do the work, like, our immune system is able to do the work to recover. But if we can, help our minds to get into that mindset and help, like, just tell ourselves, no, don't worry, I'm on the right track. I'm going to get there sooner or later. I think that really plays a role in helping us on the road of recovery, regardless of the illness.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that mentality of not an all or nothing, I found with exercise too, is a lot of people think like, okay, well, it just seems so overwhelming. It seems so daunting. It seems like so much work. And I'm like, you don't have to do like what you're seeing on commercials or on Instagram, right? It's like, it can be very simple things that you are just barely able to do, and you just consistently work at it. And you can definitely surprise yourself.
I think that's great for everyone, not just GBS patients, to get into exercising, because I know
Yeah,
I have problems too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually wanted to go back to something you said earlier too. You mentioned how the sense of community you got from meeting other GBS patients was a huge factor. But you still at times did feel isolated, of course. So what do you think was like, how do you feel GBS like overall affected your social interactions and networking even after you recovered? Do you feel like it changed much, or your perspective and how you
Absolutely. It definitely changed my perspective on life. When I was in the hospital, I was just completely paralyzed and breathing on a ventilator and thinking I'm never going to get better and I'm never going to get through this. And I'm looking at the pictures on the walls that my family had put up for me to try to kind of keep my mood up. And I was just looking at the things that I had done in the past, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to do those things again. And I'm looking at like pictures of my family, and I'm thinking I'm never going to be able to hang out with them again outside of these walls. And so it definitely changed my perspective that once I did get better and once I was out of the hospital, I was like, wow, like I got my life back, and I didn't think I was going to. So it definitely inspired me to be closer with my friends and family, and to hang out with them more often, spend more time with them, and go after the things that I wanted to do. So there was so many things that I had on my list, like a bucket list of things I'm going to do one day. And I had never thought of really going after them before, but after I got out of the hospital, it was like, no, I have to go after them now, because I mean, things can change in the blink of an eye and you just don't even realize that. So it's definitely changed my relationships with other people. It's also changed my relationship with myself, in that it's given me a lot more confidence in terms of what I've overcome and what I know that I can overcome down the road. And so it's given me that confidence to be able to go after other things. Like I've done many different fitness programs over the years, and I would have never tried them before because I would just think like they're out of my league. But every time that I did it, I would surprise myself and I would accomplish them. And so I've done a lot of traveling now that I wasn't even really interested in before. I've done a lot of mountain climbing, like a lot of active things. So just things that I would have never even tried had I not gone through GBS. I've met amazing people. I've got involved with the GBS Foundation, which I'm very active in now, and just being able to give back to that community. So to me, like, it's crazy to think of that it basically took away about 6 months of my life, and I lost out on so much time with my daughter. Like, I never got to breastfeed her. I had to stop. I never got to take her on her first walk. I missed her first smile. Like, I missed out on so much time. But with everything that's happened, I still look back on it, and I'm actually grateful for everything that I went through, because it really did make me into the person that I am today. And it's given me all these opportunities to kind of share my story, inspire others, and just use my story for good.
Yeah, I definitely like when I've been like reading on like patient stories and also talking to other GPS survivors, I've noticed like a common theme of how like it could be a blessing in disguise, the experience that you go through. Because like when you read like journals and you read like the actual like diagnosis and like the experience that you from a scientific perspective, it may seem like really daunting and like really like scary, and it definitely must be like physically like tiring and all that, but also looking at like what it could do to the person afterwards, because we can't like imagine as like other people what they go through in their shoes, the experiences, the interactions that take place within the hospital environment. It's so like unique to each person. So I feel like there's a lot of development that goes on that is behind the curtains, and like we as like other external people can't really see that unless we talk to someone, unless we hear about it from them. So yeah, I definitely think it's like the mentality and the mindset, keeping that positive. You can take a lot of good things out of it, and for sure, you are like a great example of it. Yeah,
Exactly. And I try to tell that to people a lot, people that are struggling, especially in the recovery phase, which I understand. I mean, there's just so much uncertainty and unknowns about your future, so it can be very scary. But I try to tell people, like, just try to look for the gifts, try to focus on the things that maybe has changed your perspective in a positive way. And that can help a lot.
Hard to agree with Omar. I feel like this advice is applicable again to not only GBS patients
Yes.
and validity,
yeah.
but to a lot of people. It gives them a new appreciation for the thing that they have and the thing that they should do.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, is this I guess a question to Omar and Anita too? Is this the same GBS Foundation that we're in contact with now? That we're working with?
I'm not sure. Holly, are you connected to the GBS Foundation of Canada? Like this is
Yes.
the official? Yeah, we're actually working with them for like some events this term. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Great.
that's cool.
Cool.
That's cool.
So are you dealing with Donna then, or
Yes.
Nancy?
Yeah. That's who we're
Awesome.
dealing
Yes.
with.
Great
Yeah.
friends of mine. So yeah. And it's an amazing organization. I'm so glad that I met them. Originally, when I was recovering, they had reached out to me and they just gave us so many resources, and I immediately knew like I want to get involved. And so I have been with them now for about, I think, 8 years now. So I do a lot of conferences with them. We put on a lot of awareness events, raise money. They're just an amazing organization.
Actually,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, actually, I also had a question about the science of GBS. I don't know if you could answer this, but did you ever have like any pre-existing history, like a respiratory disease or anything like that?
No, so they can't prove anything. There's no way to say for sure, but they believe that my trigger was possibly childbirth or having a C-section. So I had my daughter, and then I had a C-section. And then it was just over 3 weeks later that, and so GBS, like you said, it can sometimes come on after a respiratory illness or something, but it is common to come after surgery as well. So I've met a lot of people over the years. I've also met many women like me who have gotten GBS within about 3 to 4 weeks after giving birth. So that's kind of what they think. Like I said, it's impossible to say for sure, but
yeah, thank you for answering that, because I know there's some uncertainty regarding the causes of GBS, and I was wondering that we're also making case scenarios where there's different patients, and we're for our next upcoming event, and one of our case scenarios involves a patient with a respiratory illness.
Okay, yes, yeah, and so for respiratory illnesses, and then like food poisoning, those are the most common triggers. So it's usually like 50 to 60% of cases will be triggered by something like that. So
okay, thank you for answering that.
Yeah, and so on that note, I think that's a wrap for our episode. Thank you so much, Holly, for giving us your valuable time today. We really appreciate learning about your experiences, and thank you so much for sharing your advice. Never to give up when you are encountered with a problem, and to be resilient, stick through it. Make sure you have good support systems. And it was truly a pleasure to get to know you a little more. And we look forward to advocating your story in the hopes of providing our viewers a unique perspective on rare diseases such as GBS. And thank you to all of those who are listening, and please feel free to read up on Holly's story as well as our Q&A on our AdvoSci Health Instagram at AdvoSci Health. See you all next time.